Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Parliamentary and Scientific Committee discussion meeting. This evening we are discussing sector deals for SMEs, and I'm sure that you are all more than aware of how important our SME sector is to the general health of our economy. It's the bedrock really of the economy. It employs more people than large companies do combined, and it's a very important sector, but it's also a very innovative sector as well. And I think that giving them a sector deal that taps into that innovation, that drive, that dynamism that they have is vitally important, and something that we are going to explore this evening. And to help me do that, I have three excellent speakers. Karl Ryder, who is Professor of Physical Chemistry and a postgraduate tutor at the Materials Centre, School of Chemistry, University of Leicester. Welcome, Karl. Paul Masson, Director of Innovation Policy at Innovate UK. Good evening. And Brian Norton, Managing Director, Indestructible Paints in Birmingham. I'm going to invite each of our speakers to talk for around 10 minutes. Obviously, we want to hear all you have to say, so I will not cut you off too soon, but if it's going well over, I might try and ask you to draw your remarks to an end. But as I say, we're here to hear from you, and so that's the primary purpose. But following the presentations, we will then take some questions. If you want to ask a question, can I encourage you to use the Q&A function, which you should find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, rather than the chat. It's easier for us to marshal those questions in the Q&A. And then once we've got some questions, I'll then invite you to ask your question personally. You'll be unmuted, and then you can put your question, as I said. And if you could also please state the organisation that you are representing. Usual rules apply. Please keep yourself on mute if you are not making an active contribution, as that will keep the background noise down. Other than that, I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting discussion. And so to kick us off, I'm going to invite Karl Ryder to talk to us. Karl, 10 minutes or so, please.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And good evening, everyone. Let me just do the essential screen sharing functions. Can I just ask for confirmation that everyone can see my slides?
I can see that, yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction and the opportunity to speak here today. So I've been asked to kind of give some insight into how how important the SME sector is, and the ways that the universities interact with SMEs, and I can hopefully do that by sharing some of my experience in this area with local and national industries, and also overseas. So that's the kind of general area I want to talk about. So particularly innovation, technology transfer, and within the surface engineering sector. And I'll explain in a moment what I mean by that. So I am aware of the time constraints, and I have to say that I have a reputation for overrunning. So I will try not to do that. But this is going to give you an idea of the key messages and the content that I want to kind of highlight for you today. So I want to talk a little bit about the relevance of the service engineering sector to the UK economy, and I'll do that first of all. I'm also conscious that whenever I present in these types of environment, especially in industry, there's lots of people will be thinking, well, why would I listen to an academic? What relevance has that particular sector got to me and that experience? So I'm not going to dwell on my own background, except to give you some kind of context as to what qualifies really me to speak in this sense. And then I'll share with you some of my own insights into why it is that SMEs need access to university facilities and expertise, and how they can do that under the current in the current environment. And lastly, then I'll share hopefully with you some of what I think are the challenges, the opportunities in these areas, and finish up with some key messages, hopefully on time. Okay, Oops, so I wasn't going to go to that straight away. I was going to invite you to engage in another sort of minor challenge, which is to ask you to imagine a world. Now, normally I would say without aircraft, and actually that's rather easy to do at the moment. But under normal circumstances, imagine your world without aircraft, without mobile phone technology, without computing, without sophisticated automobiles, high power batteries, and a range of really machinery. You know, imagine this as your world, and that would be your world without surface engineering, because the principles, the application, and the development of surface engineering technologies underpin all of these key manufacturing and key technology areas, from aerospace engines, which Brian will talk about a bit later, through to microfabrication of electronics, to the development and manufacture and application of batteries and all sorts of things, medical implants, anything really that involves the improving of the surface characteristics of a bulk material, whether for electrical application, whether for wear resistance, corrosion resistance, or any of a number of features. Batteries in particular, of course, we don't see what goes on inside of a battery, but all of the engineering, the chemistry that's associated with the electrodes of a battery, it's all surface engineering. And some stats there for you. So this is a rather old number now. It's a report that was published in 2017. But the estimate there is that surface coatings in general contributed around about 13 billion to the manufacturing output of the UK economy. And really, if you look further than that, if you count the kind of the supply chain and manufacturing technologies that these underpin, then you can estimate that the surface engineering in general has impacted positively on products valued up to about 170 odd billion, and that's a very large proportion of the UK manufacturing output. I think it was 190 billion in 2018. So that really, without too overselling, it gives you a strong idea of where the sector is and how significant it is to the UK economy. So why listen to me? Well, I don't. You can share these. We'll share these slides later, so you can read text as you like. But suffice it to say that although I'm an academic, I'm based in an academic department and carry out a lot of work which is associated with fundamental research. I've spent the last 15 years working with many of the industries in this sector, some small and some large. And I sit now, privileged to sit as president of the Institute of Materials Finishing, which is a kind of interfacial organization serving the needs of both the academic and industry sectors. So I've seen, if you like, the picture really from both sides of this equation. Okay, well, why do we need universities? Why do SMEs need universities? And again, here's some commonly quoted statistics. These are not mine. These are government statistics. But this is a well-known one for SMEs. 99.9% of the business population. So the overwhelming majority of business population are small and medium-sized enterprises. And with those in mind, in this particular sector, in the surface engineering and advanced coatings sector, these businesses are often serving really rapidly moving technologies, things which are developing quickly, being applied quickly, and competing, often with other very large industries in niche areas. So these SMEs, these businesses really need access to development and measurement and characteristic and innovation facilities in order to help them move with those trends. And of course, as SMEs, their ability to engage in those activities is limited because it often requires infrastructure investment, expensive equipment, access to databases, libraries, and all sorts of other things, which can just simply not be possible for those small organizations, and often not even for larger ones. So SMEs, do need these universities. They do need to be able to have a facility to kind of access, a route in to engage in these kinds of activities and keep them competitive. So how do they do that? This is the big question, isn't it, really? So how do SMEs currently access facilities to help them drive forward technology and innovation? Well, this is really just a short list of ways that are common. So it can happen by contract funding, simple and straightforward, and that does happen. It's often quite difficult and time-consuming to arrange because of non-disclosure and all sorts of activities that precede actual doing of things. And it can also be a very expensive way for SMEs to do research. So it's an option, but it's not necessarily a very common one. There are, of course, the networks and partnerships set up for knowledge transfer, the KTNs and KTPs. And again, those serve a very specific purpose, and they're very useful often to SMEs, but do require some knowledge and access to the kind of organizations that will help to set up those partnerships and networks. So again, they are very useful and appropriate, but not always very accessible. And then there are the local, often university-led innovation schemes, and enterprise partnerships which are local. And indeed, the University of Leicester has its own innovation hub, which I picture here, which is specifically set up to try and reach out to local industries in order to encourage these types of partnerships. And then there are the larger catapults, the Manufacturing Technology Centre, for example, in Coventry, TWI in Cambridge. And those are more difficult, although actually one could argue that those are the sorts of things that SMEs need. They're all generally more difficult for SMEs to access. Although one of the roles that we facilitate as the IMF, the Institute of Materials Finishing, is to be able to try and provide a conduit for SMEs to those types of facilities. And also I should add that there's the Surface Engineering Association, which again does that. So these are the types of mechanisms that SMEs can engage in order to get access to universities. So what I would like to do is to give you a couple of examples of projects that I've been fortunate to be involved with, where small companies have been able to do that relatively successfully, and mostly those are through Innovate UK funding schemes. So being in Leicester, I've worked with a lot of small businesses in the Midlands, particularly around Birmingham, where there's a heritage of so-called metal finishing, typically electroplating, dating back almost to Michael Faraday's time. And this is an example of a company, EC Williams. They're based in the jewelry sector in Birmingham, who are a small industry, about 100 employees, producing coatings typically for automotive, as anti-corrosion coatings for components of all sorts of things that go in cars. And the challenge there is that traditional coatings such as cadmium have now been, are listed now as toxic and very harmful. And some of the processes and the chemistries that go with these kinds of coatings are really, really unpleasant and not nice to work with. So one of our drives has been to develop more environmentally sustainable manufacturing and processes that will help companies like this to kind of move with the times and with the legislation, of course. So we worked with EC Williams on doing what they couldn't do on their own, which is to develop more environmentally sustainable processes to replace cadmium and some of the current alternatives. And in order to do that, EC Williams was able to access our expertise in the centre in Leicester, and able to kind of engage in small scale pilot plants. So this is an indication here of a 100-litre plant. Their production line, you can see here, is about 40 or 50 meters long, thousands of litres of aqueous chemistry. So it's about taking that idea and developing it through interaction with the university and so on. So bringing it up the technology readiness level. That's the key thing here. And another example, this time for aerospace. So once again, focused on coatings. This particular one is on aluminium, which also is in fact a cadmium alternative. But again, the current technologies for aluminium plating are either rather unpleasant or very expensive, or else very flammable. So again, there are reasons why some of the existing industrial processes really are difficult and costly for the supply chain to operate. So this particular project, again funded by Innovate UK, was focused within the supply chain for the aerospace industry, but critically here also involved the end user, and the end user in this context was Airbus. So that's another key feature here. Not only do we need to involve the SMEs within the supply chain, but in order to drive the technologies forward, there has to be some mechanism to engage the end users as well. And that's sometimes a little bit more difficult to do. Okay, so the last of the examples that I wanted to give you within the time frame that I'm kind of working to, this is actually a recent one, and quite a nice example of one of the most recent Innovate UK schemes, which has engaged in quite short projects which are focused. And this particular one is about recovery of critical raw materials. So of course, as we move our manufacturing to more and more high-tech products. I mean, for example, only, well, five years ago, we were all buying incandescent light bulbs. I sit from a house that my wife and I built 7 years ago, and at that time LEDs existed, but we couldn't afford them. You know, they were very expensive. Whereas now we go into shops and actually you can't really easily buy incandescent light bulbs. So the trend towards using LEDs is inexorable and very steep. And yet they use critical raw material, gallium, which at the moment is not recovered from these LEDs. So we're generating huge volumes of waste, or will be doing, and at the moment have no real strategy for recovering those critical raw materials. So what you see here is a series of pictures from which these are little chips from LED lamps which have been scrapped. And this is a domestic one here. You can see these are about 2 or 3 millimeters square, these active chips. This is an industrial lighting unit, and these are collected from a variety of sources. So this particular project, again, involved a few small companies that were focused on collection and recovery. Again, we've got EC Williams here, and Ricolite. So we're looking at trying to develop technology, innovating to find ways of recovering the gallium from these waste chips and reprocessing and valorizing and so on. And again, it involves small scale, moving away from the lab, but towards pilot plant. And this for me is what Innovate UK funding is really all about. Facilitating these small companies to engage in research and innovation activity that they wouldn't normally be able to do. Okay, so the last example, how am I doing for time? The last example.
Karl, if you could start to draw it to a close, because we're at 16 minutes.
Oh, crikey, yes, of course. Yes, okay, so of course. So the last example I was going to give you is actually of the Energy Research Accelerator, which is a strategic government project. But again, to help make facilities available to business. And of course, we can let business access large-scale facilities that are currently centrally funded. Okay, so the opportunities, finding partners, the challenges and opportunities, finding partners can be difficult. Understanding the funding models and navigating the financial and reporting mechanisms is often very challenging for SMEs. And launching new ideas and technology is really the opportunity. So the key message here, which if you'll forgive me, Stephen, just one more minute. There is provision for SMEs, but it's often difficult to find and access. And that's one of the things we really need to look at. Current funding models can be difficult and can actually disadvantage SMEs. Again, I'm happy to talk about that. And you know, I'll finish by just saying that the university sector does represent a huge resource for SMEs and more generally. And those collaborations, in my experience, have been mutually beneficial. So we just really need to look at these challenges and try and make it easier and improve integration. And I'll forgive me for overrunning. I'll finish there.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. An awful lot of good stuff in there, which is why I didn't want to stop you in your tracks.
Thank you.
Please, the other two speakers, feel free to take a minute or three more. I'm sure none of us will mind going on to 7 if there are plenty of questions. But all great stuff, and the model sounds really exciting. Is it a push or a pull model that drives this? And is there more that universities could do to potentially push out into sectors that don't realise they need your help?
So that's a really good question. It's actually both. I mean, I've done the pushing. I've tried to push out technology, and I've also been in a position where the companies have come to me and said, "Look, we really need to do this." So in that sense, it's a pull. My view of this really, and my perception, I think, is it's generally more successful if it's a pull model. You know, if the need is there and the companies are really wanting to do it, it's generally more successful that way. If you're trying to push against, you know, a barrier of some sort, then it's always more difficult, especially as an academic.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that.
You're welcome.
We will move on to our next speaker, who is Paul Mason. Paul, Director of Innovation Policy at Innovate UK. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Stephen, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak. Can I just check that you can see my slides all right?
We can.
Very good. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul Mason. I'm Director of Innovation Policy at Innovate UK. I'm going to talk a little bit about why innovation is important, and then a little bit about what we're doing to try and help companies to develop new products and services. And it was great to see so many really good examples from Karl, actually, because he spoke to a lot of the mechanisms in a bit of detail, so I'll skim over some of the things I might have said earlier. Okay, so we live on a small rock off the coast of Europe, and 99% of the world's population lives somewhere else, and 97% of global GDP is non-UK GDP. So there are lots of opportunities because there are lots of customers and they've got some money. So we need to be outward looking to the rest of the world in terms of how we engage with it. But we do have to ask ourselves, what do we have to offer all those people? And I've often heard it sort of said, well, there's a few ways in which you can create something that's worth selling, or if you can create wealth. One is to dig it up. But most of our mines finished, in, at least not putting coal mining aside, but you know, the 1750s, we ran out of silver or something. You can grow things, but it's always going to be difficult to compete with vast wheat plains in Saskatchewan or something. Or we can sell our manual labor, which in some parts of the world is household income of $200 or $300 a month. So we don't really want to be doing that. So we really do need, if we want the standard of living we have now, to focus on products of high value, services of high value that are difficult to copy, so that you can retain that value and other people don't just come out with Me Too's and undercut you on price. So that's really important context. And similar bit of context, today's trade, so the GDP that we do have, comes from yesterday's innovation activity. So if we want goods and services to trade tomorrow, then we have to invest in their creation today. And that is, I think, really, really important. When the good times come, will the UK be offering something the rest of the world wants to buy? So innovation is absolutely the key to doing that. And we define business innovation as the commercially successful exploitation of ideas. Oh, hang on, that moved forward, it shouldn't have done. And it drives company growth, productivity, exports, and the economy more generally. And we help companies achieve that by helping them to develop new products, processes, or services, or business models based on new ideas and based on technologies and IP that can be protected along the lines of the sort of things that Karl was speaking to just now. And the UK is pretty good at that. We're 4th globally, according to the most recent Global Innovation Index. So we should have reason to be confident, but there's a difference between having the cards in your hand and actually winning the trick. So so we've got a good raw material, but that doesn't mean we don't need to do the work to actually land it. And in order to innovate, companies need to, and there's a list of things here. Karl sort of wrapped up with a few of the obstacles and early on, but you need to have viable, commercially viable, good ideas. And you need to know who your customers are, because my own experience is that pull is much better than push. But then you need to understand lots of other things, like what is the cost base? What is my cost base? What are my competitors' cost base? What is the pricing going to be? What's my USP? Before I even start thinking about raising the money. And then once I've got a product, what's its shelf life? What's its defects? How long should I warranty it for? All these kind of things. I won't go into too much detail, but most of you, if any of you have done new product development and tried to launch something into the marketplace, you'll know exactly what this is about. The point I'm making is that it is inherently difficult, because you only need one of those to go wrong and your whole thing fails, whereas you've got to get all of them right. So statistically, you've got a big task on. So that is why companies need help to do it, and that's what we provide. So we're the UK's innovation agency. We help companies of all sizes, including SMEs. A lot of our funding goes to SMEs, also to universities in collaboration with them, across all sectors, to access the research expertise, the partners, the investors and the markets that they need in order to innovate and grow. So we help companies with the investment, and we help them with the connections. And this supports the growth of the economy overall. And of course, companies pay their corporation taxes, hopefully, but their employees pay PAYE. It's more difficult to be efficient on that. So that actually goes into the exchequer to HMT directly, and that is the return on our investment. And we know that the tools work. So here's a kind of meaning up and averaging up of various economic evaluations we've done of different programs. And we think that the 8,500 companies we've supported have created something like 100,000 jobs and have added something like 22 billion in GVA to the UK economy. So while we do need to get better, and we are thinking about our new strategy, I'll tell you a little bit about at the end, we know that we should be building from these strengths and not tearing up the rule book, as it were. So we help companies in two ways, and I hope this will resonate with what Karl was saying. So we fund and we connect. When we connect, we try and link innovators or people with ideas or people with problems to potential collaborators, to relevant expertise, such as would have been available or is available at Leicester, I should say, access to equipment and facilities, another of Karl's examples, overseas collaborations, and we have a good regional presence so that to help kind of build on local strengths where that is the appropriate thing to do. And then when it comes to funding, we provide grants and loans to help companies with all kinds of different types of activities. So at the early end, it might be just to explore the potential of an idea, or it may be into a more detailed product development or process development, or looking at what's my business model. And the idea is generally to help accelerate the process of going from idea to commercial success. And we only invest in things that don't really yet exist. So it's all about the potential of tomorrow. And we only do things which the private sector wouldn't be capable of doing on its own. So where there's a case for taxpayers' money to be deployed through us. So the Connect portfolio, there are 3 or 4 main tools, I guess. So some of these letters cropped up beforehand in Karl's slide. So the knowledge transfer network, it builds communities of interest in high potential areas. So if you have an interest in graphene or quantum technologies or biosciences or gene therapy or something, you'll probably find a community of people who are similarly interested in that, and you can learn from them. You can do peer-to-peer learning. You can form collaborations with them. You might meet people who you want to co-develop products with. They also run missions overseas, and they have some decent topic expertise in those areas because of the people that they hire. Innovate UK Edge is a service that used to be delivered by the EEN. Basically, it provides bespoke business services to companies, to the management teams particularly, to help them realize the potential of what they have to offer, but also where the gaps in their capabilities are, and then to try and help fill it. And then the catapults we talked a little bit about, but a catapult is expertise and equipment under one roof, which no individual company might be able to afford to the capital to build it. So they are intended to be open access. I'm disappointed if some people have found it difficult to work with them or difficult to access them. We'd always be keen to learn particular cases on that to see if we can help unstick any friction there. On the funding side, as I said, grown loans or grants. Topic-based things tends to come through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund in grand challenge areas. So they're the 4 areas from the industrial strategy that was published a few years ago, now shortly to be refreshed, or at least a growth strategy coming forward soon from government. In responsive mode, so that means you don't have to pick a topic before you bid. You can come forward with any idea for a technology in any market, and we will work on that. And KTP is a great example of an open program there, transferring somebody from the university into a company to help embed knowledge. Or we manage quite a number of programs for the government. For example, the aerospace, the Advanced Propulsion Center for the aerospace industry. That's our ATI, Advanced Technology Institute, or Advanced Propulsion Center for Automotive. We run the SBRI program, and we do quite a lot of digital things for DCMS, so things like cybersecurity or 5G or Internet of Things, those kinds of technologies. So that's funding. What's the scale of our activities? Well, as I speak to you now, we have something like 5,600 projects which are live. 2,000 of them are collaborative, so it just shows that a significant number of what we do in our portfolio are people where you go faster when you work together. Over 1,200 of them involve an academic partner, or nearly 2,000 involve an SME. So we're very keen on collaboration, and the KTN works very hard on that, simply because it's so efficient. And you can see that since we started, we've funded over 22 or nearly 22,000 projects, and you know, they've been pretty significant. And 80% of our industry participants are SMEs if you look over the long term. The data on the right box, you can get a copy of the slides, but that shows you the scale of the response we've made in response to the COVID recovery. So that is both healthcare related projects to deal with the pandemic, and it's also support for companies whose cash flow might be difficulty, or who's to keep their projects alive that they might have been reining in their R&D spend. So as I said at the beginning, we're refreshing our strategy. We don't yet have a strategy, so that's work in progress, but I'm happy to share with you some of the themes that have come up through our engagement with businesses. We've held workshops, sort of around 15 of them. We've engaged over 100 companies at C-level or founder level. Most people are in founder level or C-suite. And these are the 5 sort of main strategic themes that we think we should probably be working on going forward. So one is the future economy. So what does that look like? How do we achieve net zero? What kind of technologies are going to matter? What are the key sectors for the UK over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years? How does any given company get to grow? So this whole idea of scaling up, we'll be investing in that to help companies to grow. And then we'll be helping position UK companies in the supply chains of the future. So working with DIT to do that, but we're not doing trade. So it won't be about export credit guarantees or any of those sorts of things. But if you want to be selling into Tesla in California, what do you have to do now to get into their R&D pipeline so that when they're ready to buy something that is that product, the UK companies in the supply chain, and you're not starting from scratch. So a bit of activity around that, and also inward investment. Ecosystem, the UK's got a fantastic ecosystem with lots of brilliant bodies, not least the universities, but also things like the National Physical Laboratory or the Intellectual Property Office, or lots of other activities that go on. And we think it's right to try and help join up that and make that delivery work more seamlessly, or at least play our part in that. And then government levers. So when we did our consultation, lots and lots of businesses were saying how much the government could do to help. Or more that the government could do to help. The government already does an awful lot to help business innovation, but there are 1 or 2 things the government could do more of, and the government shouldn't forget to do what it's already doing. Keep going with what you know works. And all of those 5 things building on some core foundations of, well, either assets that we can leverage or things that we hold to be true. So obviously the UK's got a fantastic research base. Let's make the most of it. We've got lots of places all around the UK where there are brilliant companies, so we should make sure we connect into them. We've got world-class design, yet too few companies use it. Ditto, there's an issue. How do we get more talent and skills coming forward? And then responsible innovation, which is balancing or making sure societal good is balanced with economic growth and inclusion. So the sort of diversity agenda there is really important. We think it's really important to make sure that we harness the strengths of all types of people in the UK, irrespective of gender or race or any other protected characteristic. So just to wrap up, basically, business innovation is absolutely critical for UK prosperity, but it is hard to do. And global competition is fierce, and there are fantastic companies out there and really great universities around the UK. So we need to help our companies to succeed, and Innovate UK provides that help. I'm just trying to switch my phone off at home. The obstacles are not all the same, and that means we need a variety of tools to help companies to overcome those barriers. So that is something that that's why we don't just have one toolkit and why we don't just do one thing. We know those tools work, and I gave you the numbers beforehand, and government plays a critical role, and we are committed to working with government in that. We've identified some good growth opportunities, and we have a new strategy under development, yeah, more of that in due course when it becomes public. And with that, I'll stop. Thanks for your attention.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. A lot of very interesting stuff in there. It struck me back at the beginning when you talked about our mining ended some time ago.
Yeah.
Recently interested to hear that there may be about 10% of the world's lithium in Cornwall.
Yes, and the SATAT's Catapult are doing some work to see if you can't see it using satellites. So, but it's not clear how much of it there is and whether it be economically competitive with South America. But definitely worth exploring, and there could be a resurgence of that industry. You never know.
Absolutely, and I think that would be quite interesting. My question though was going to be, I mean, you talked about all the fantastic things you've been doing, the large numbers involved. Do you have capacity to do more if more people were to come and ask, or is there, is the limit money? Is it people, time?
Yeah, it's a multifaceted question, really. I mean, I think that it's a point about planning, really. So we definitely could have the capacity if we knew it was coming, and if we had long-term sight of the kind of expectation that would be on us. So I mean, I think capacity shouldn't be considered as a long-term constraint. I mean, the UK economy, we will all be living on this island, or some of us will be, in 20 or 30 years' time, and others, there'll be our children or children's children in 100 years' time. And a lot of the wealth that the UK has now has been 200 years in the building. So we really shouldn't let sort of capacity in any given month or in any given year for an organization like that be the inhibitor of national growth. So I would say that we're deeply committed to doing whatever it takes to put the capacity in to realize the opportunities. If we look at, as companies come to us now and say, could we have a grant? And of course we compete, we fund the best ideas. So we run competitions, and the people that get the highest scores from our independent assessors get funded. We definitely run out of money before we run out of good ideas. So we do get ideas that are not fundable. There, people put things in and you just kind of think, well, this isn't credible, or this is a perpetual motion machine, so that's not going to work, or, but actually, if we had greater resources, we could definitely support more companies. Definitely, there's no question about that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's loud and clear. So thank you for that. Right, we're going to move on to our third and final speaker before I throw it open for questions. And our third speaker is Brian Norton. And as I said earlier, Brian is Managing Director, Indestructible Paints Limited in Birmingham. And I assume, Brian, you're going to talk to us from the coalface, as it were, from the other side of the equation. So we very much look forward to hearing what you have to say for 10 minutes or so.
Can you see the screen? We
can, thank you.
Okay. Right, really, I'm going to encapsulate the two previous discussions realistically. We're an SME. If you know, simplistically, you call it a paint. We make paints and coatings for high value applications. We're the bottom end of a very odd wedge. If we don't make the coatings, applicators don't apply them, and people like Rolls-Royce don't sub-assemble them into a jet engine. I'll come on to that in due course. Just to give you a flavour of it, and I can scroll down. Why isn't it not scrolling down? we're a SME. We started in 1978. I joined in 1990. My father set it up, and there were 5 staff. And we made at the time Rolls-Royce's key organic paints and coatings, and they had their own paints lab at the paints and coatings lab, and they invented specialist coatings for their own use because the major paint companies weren't interested in the volumes that were used on aircraft engines at the time. We were turning over about 300,000 in 1990 when I joined, with 5-6 staff. We're now 42, it was 45 staff till the pandemic hit us. We were 6.5 million. So it's been reasonable growth, and I'll give you examples of where from and some of our current customers. We'll also talk about some innovations and growth with Rolls-Royce and other sector clients, and some of the universities we've worked with, so forth. So as I've said, we're a company established in 1978, based in UK. We sell to 85 countries. We have distributors in India, Germany, Spain, Singapore, and America. And if you think the aircraft industry is biggest in America, and so our biggest customer is America. So people like Boeing, Sikorsky, Pratt & Whitney, General Electric buy our coatings. But wherever an aircraft engine lands, so if you land in New Zealand, they don't want to take the engine off and take it back to the UK to be coated, as was happening when we first developed the coating I'm going to be talking a little about. So the facilities are UK based. We do our own R&D, and we can manufacture, and then we deliver it, and we show people how to apply it, and then we can ship all over the world. So we have a complex association of bodies, including export packing that will take it to China. One of our big issues at the moment is trying to get it to Northern Ireland. That's another story. So going back to the KTN, we first got what happened was Rolls-Royce said to us they were bringing in a product called Cermetec material, and they didn't want to use it because they couldn't buy it. They had to have it applied, and therefore they asked us to match the product and develop it and launch it, which we did. We were successful in 1994. We got the stage 1 Smart Award, and then we won a stage 2 winner. And academically, this one here, which Paul will probably have never seen, we were, even though you'd invented it in 95, we didn't have any customers because people weren't trained how to use it. So we had to roll it out. So it became a runner at Rolls-Royce, and then Safran or Turbomeca adopted it. Then Pratt & Whitney in Canada heard it and adopted it, and it rolled out accordingly from there. But it gives you an idea. That product is made with chromic acid. And if you know anything about local or industrial rules at the moment, the REACH registration is making it very frowned upon, virtually illegal. This is a typical application of the material. You can see here turbine blades and a turbine shaft. Basically, once it was approved for a gas turbine for flight, unbeknown to us, it is also now a major constituent in North Sea oil gas pumping and power generation. And in fact, after the pandemic started, we were questioning ourselves whether we're essential services. And then Rolls-Royce Nuclear rang us up and said they had to have something for a military use. And we also had a begging email from Siemens in India, who were overhauling power generations in their Hyderabad plant to keep the electricity working. And this was happening in April and May last year. So we had to get our coatings made and out and delivered to India in the middle of the pandemic. And this gives you some idea. So it's not only gas turbines for aircraft, it's on helicopters for rescue helicopters and power generation. And now I did have a load of approvals. I'm trying to keep this down to a short discussion. and it's rolled forward, but basically Rolls-Royce, Sikorsky, Pratt & Whitney, General Electric, Safran, ITP, MTU are all users of our coatings. Typically, our coatings, the one I've just talked about, and there's only one range, in a jet engine, sits about here, because this is where it's somewhere between 300 and 700 degrees centigrade. We make coatings for the front of the engine, for erosion resistance, from -50 to +50, but it's got to stand water, raindrops, high UV, 40,000 feet, 600 miles an hour. You get the gist. It's quite demanding environments. And we now do coatings down at the hot end of the engine. We're just developing, following another KTN grant about 3 years ago, a diffusion coating, which runs at about 1,000 degrees centigrade. The sort of client issues we have are, obviously, does the product work? How do they use it? How much does it cost? How do you keep it? Because you've got to keep it working in normal circumstances. The rules and laws are changing constantly, and EU REACH is now UK REACH. We have various solvents, so people are trying to reduce the solvent content and health and safety, and they're trying to get rid of solvents as well. So you can see they're trying to make them water-based if they can. We can see typically here other products that we've evolved onto, because when you actually make a coating for a jet engine, I go back to the inverted pyramid. If we don't make 2,000 litres of paint, then there are 50 applicator companies in the UK who can't apply it, and they sub-assemble into Rolls-Royce jet engines. We've evolved onto other things, and this is the Doughty aerospace propellers coated in erosion coatings that they couldn't get sorted out, and anti-static, and it's used on those and the Hercules and various other materials. And you can see, as we've grown, we've evolved into other more complex requests. We don't paint the whole frame, that's the PPG and AXO, because they're 3,000 litres a time, and there's 1,000 aircraft being built in a normal year. That's 500,000 litres a year. That's just for new aircraft, and overhauling them, there are generally about 40,000 aircraft flying. As an SME, we just haven't got the capability for that. But we make specialist coatings for wheels and brakes. They're very hot when they land, and new anti-corrosive primers are actually being developed at the moment and under trial. So high temperature, we also do high temperature, obviously. Anti-corrosive, we got the approval for Sikorsky helicopters in the late 1990s, and McDonnell Douglas Boeing on this nice piece of kit here, the Apache. That is our coating on magnesium, and magnesium is a particular issue at the moment because REACH has made the pre-treatment become illegal, but no thought's being given to it. There is no commonality, so they're small users, and there's no way I can link them all together very easily at the moment, certainly not in short order. In 2013, when REACH was promulgated, we did an Innovate UK, which ran for 3 years, run by Rolls-Royce with BAE, GE, Safran, Western Helicopters, UTC, and so forth. Trying to get them all speaking to each other was the first problem, with 6 sets of lawyers having an argument about their IPR. But we managed to establish what problems there were with the loss of chrome in making aircraft, and it is still causing problems and still being developed. The implications on a helicopter, and this isn't for common knowledge, this was on the paper that was part of the press release of the halfway through the project, and these were all the things that were affected on a Western helicopter, but they then withdrew their permission for us to be used in general publicity because it was causing so many problems. These are all things that are at risk because of the environment at this moment in time. And in no particular order at the moment, we've been working with a KTN funded Innovate UK project with Rolls-Royce, led by Rolls-Royce, that finished 3 years ago. that was the most successful product Rolls-Royce had seen. They'd tested everything in the world. Ours was the best, but it's still not right. Rolls were funding us separately until about a year ago, obviously with the pandemic, and we're still developing it in place with them. One of the problems we have is we have 50 plus NDAs in place. We're never allowed to talk about our work. Publicity is not allowed. One of the things we're working at the moment is looking at using the product we showed you on the Hercules propeller. The wind turbine, the offshore research establishment Catapult has tested our product and found them to be very good. We have another project going on at the moment. I'll find out more about that next week. Another project we did was the new Queen Elizabeth. When they landed the F-35 on it, it basically melted the deck. We couldn't do anything about it at the time, but we've had a project that's run with the MOD, and we now have a deck that stands up to 1,000 degrees C, and the F-35 landing on it. I moved on to here. This is just a summary of some of the universities and bodies that we've worked with, most of which have been worked in before. But you can see we not only get dragged into aerospace, I call it the knowledge economy. And you've talked about batteries and everything like that. One of the problems is that they are small volumes with lots of brain power in it. So if you think about a Rolls-Royce jet engine, they don't use a lot of metal, but they use a lot of knowledge. And the big guys, the PPGs and AXOs and people like that, aren't terribly interested in the small volumes of specialist product that Rolls-Royce and other companies need to use to keep their engines and parts running. So we get dragged into other things like undercarriages, train parts, a lot of F1 parts and so forth. And that really is the end of it. I've kept it down to 10 minutes, hopefully.
Brian, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating. I used to run a small printing business, completely different sector, but it brings it all back. The challenges of running a small business. But you do have the ability, of course, when you run your own business, to turn on a sixpence and adapt to ever-changing circumstances. Just one question before I go over to the questions that have been submitted. I mean, what do you think the biggest challenge for the future for you is? Is it as obvious as it looks that aviation is going to be stuck where it is for some time and that it may not come back to the same level, or are you confident new markets will emerge and your future looks bright?
It's certainly not the easiest of times at the moment, and unfortunately one of our major customers is Rolls-Royce, and they are in a mess. Luckily, because we've spread our business, I say we use them on helicopters and so forth, defence coatings, and so we have got a spread of business that keeps us viable. I'm hopeful of whether the large jet engines will be the same in the future, I'm not certain. And also, if they move to different alternative fuels, people just don't realise what sort of effects these things can have on metallurgy. And that's where the specialist coatings come in. People don't realise it until they've got halfway through the project, and then they say, oh, we need a specialist coating for it. How do we develop it?
Yes, of course, and they'll come to someone like you. Thank you very much. Right, the first question I had is from my colleague, Karl Moynihan, who is sitting in listening. Can we unmute Karl? And Karl, please ask your question.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, thanks to the three speakers, really interesting presentations and given different sort of flavours of different aspects of the issues here. I'd like to just maybe address some of the points that Paul was raising. Now, Paul, you talked about Tesla in California as an example. And we're all here because we know and support the very strong research base that's here in the UK. But when we're talking about recovery from the pandemic, and we've still got all the innovation taking place just now, but are the companies still going to be there in the same numbers in order to exploit the innovation? And are they still going to have the money available to invest in SMEs or research groups that might provide products for them?
Shall I speak, Stephen?
Please, sorry, Paul.
Yeah. Thanks, Carol, for the question. It's a really great question, actually, and you'll have seen the extent of the effort we put into COVID response programs. And one of the reasons for that is that if you look at what happens to R&D investment by companies after a recession, it can take a long time to come back. And in fact, some sectors took over a decade to recover in terms of their R&D investment from the banking crash of 2008. So it's the first thing you cut, because you don't cut sales, you don't cut production, but you cut everything else you possibly can. And R&D often is so one of the reasons we've been focusing so much on supporting companies is to try and keep that R&D investment alive. And there are still some sectors where R&D hasn't yet recovered to 2007 levels. But if you look at the data, because we designed our programs based on having looked at what happened in 2008, actually. But if you look at the sectors that did carry on investing in R&D, sorry, excuse me, I'm going to accept this and then hang up. If you looked at the companies that did invest in R&D in sort of 2008, 2009 through the cuts, they came out stronger than the guys who bailed out. So if you can keep your nerve and keep going, you do much better. So that's really important. In terms of the research base, I mean, I think the UK does have a fantastic research base. And I mean, you hinted at the point, investment in research is the turning of money into knowledge. And our job is to help companies turn it back again. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I'm optimistic because I think, that people are talking about another roaring 20s, but just 100 years later. So I do think the good times will come back, but it's really important that companies focus on the future. And I think the UK is well placed, actually. I'm pretty optimistic that the opportunity is there if we hold our nerve and if we aren't frightened of the hard work.
Sorry, just how long can we hold our nerve for?
I think it depends upon your sector, really. I mean, if you're in retail, you're not doing too badly, especially if you've got a good internet activity on it. If you're in healthcare, there are going to be no issues on that. If you're in net zero, I mean, there's no question that if you look at Maslow, there's no question that people are going to need on the planet. There will be 9.5 billion people living here by 2050. They're all going to need somewhere to live. They're all going to want to have something to eat. They're all going to need to heat their homes. And if UK companies can provide products and services that do that and position themselves to export or to collaborate or to make locally and to be in partnerships with that 5 or 10 year horizon, there's no reason that we couldn't be producing cell therapies for diabetes cures in India, while we couldn't be helping companies, to good nutrition, but without deforestation. So I'm pretty optimistic. But I think the next few years are going to be pretty tough. But for me, since 99% of the money is not on this rock, we shouldn't be sitting looking at each other here. We should be looking outwards and across the globe to the kind of business that Brian was describing, where his customers are all over the world, and we all need to be thinking like that, because that's where the money is.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Carol. Yes, thank you for that, Paul. An air of optimism. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned that some sectors hadn't recovered from the banking crisis. Were they sectors that were already, seeing a decline in their operation, or is that?
So R&D investment, I think, was the things that happened. So agriculture and food is perhaps a good example of that. That funding R&D investment in agri-food is only just back at 2007 levels. I think very slightly below it. And I think that is a sector that that is starting to change now. I mean, something like 60% of dairies have automated milking machines. Lots of people are investigating robotics and things like that, with precision agriculture and more efficient use of things like fertilizers. The future is in that stuff, and there is a lot of work going on. but it does take a while, and it's more difficult to farm in the UK. You know, if you're trying to sell at a low price than it is if you've got great big flat prairies, you know.
Yes. I mean, I was also aware that some of the regulations didn't necessarily help innovation in that particular sector. We did an inquiry on the Science and Technology Committee into the use of drones, which fly at low level. They have to be at a certain height, which makes it difficult to do that precision mapping, farming, fertilizing, etc.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's always interesting to hear back how we, as a parliament, can help drive innovation where there are those sorts of barriers.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to move on to some more questions, and my next questioner is Raymond Joyce. Raymond, I think someone will unmute you, and if I could remind anyone who wants to ask a question to put it in the chat, sorry, the Q&A, not the chat, and don't raise their hands. Thank you.
I've unmuted.
Marvellous.
Right, okay. It's been a really stimulating session from the university right through to somebody in my own backyard up in Birmingham making indestructible coatings. The thing that really interests me is for SMEs, they a lot of the R&D that they get involved in is something that they ought to be able to leverage off in the for their future. And where you have a company, a small SME that has invested its money in any of these collaborations with universities or with Innovate UK, to what extent are they then going to get a competitive advantage that they can maintain for the future?
Who would like to comment on that?
I can definitely comment. I don't know if Karl might like to speak for the academic point of view first of all.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. No, I think that's a really important question. I have to say that the companies that I've been involved with have often the technologies and the innovations have often been quite low on the TRL scale. So, and this is an area where Innovate is quite clear. It doesn't fund fundamental science. It funds that kind of transition between a concept and all the steps that are then necessary to develop and scale up and then ultimately commercialize. So my involvements and interactions have mainly been at the low end of that TRL. But nevertheless, I mean, the question is really about how a company, the value for money, how they get that commercial advantage, whether the technology is then commercializable, and how they protect it. Well, in terms of protection, really, which I think was the question that you typed in, Raymond, it's conventional, really. I mean, a lot of it is know-how, and that which is specifically not know-how is then invested in terms of patents. I mean, naturally, as an academic, I want to publish, but of course, we enter into those agreements early on in terms of consortium agreements and NDAs to decide at the outset where that IP lies and how it will be handled during the development of the technology. So I hope that answers your question from my point of view.
I think one comment on the value would have been, sorry, Raymond, did you?
Well, it's whether when the SME makes an approach, where the SME is pulling you in as opposed to being pushed, to what extent are they savvy enough if that they realize they need to protect their intellectual property that they are in fact funding?
Oh, well, I think that's tied up quite tightly by the way that Innovate funds these things. I mean, there are processes that one goes through beforehand during the application, and subsequently, if funding is announced, and of course Paul can say more about this, if funding is announced, then there's the whole process of consortium agreement, which includes where the IP lies and how it should be handled, and that's all agreed before anything starts.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of the value, I mean, you can only accrue value if you find someone who'll pay you for your product or your service. So So you can have knowledge and you can protect it, but unless you've got a customer, you just don't go anywhere. So, so the most important thing is, have you got a customer, and will they pay you more for what you're offering than it costs you to deliver it to them? And if that, I mean, it's terribly simple, right? I mean, it's hard to do, but the concept is, it's like football, put the ball in the net. Not difficult to say, quite hard to do, if depending on who you're competing against. So so yeah, I think, absolutely knowing the customers and the price points and the way that, the value chains work is essential. And then protecting it so you can't be undercut through patents, through design rights, through copyrights, or as Karl said, practicing in secret. I mean, that's slightly more, you're slightly more vulnerable depending upon what the secret is. But yeah, that's absolutely essential. And as Karl said, we won't fund any projects that don't have collaboration agreements in place that protect the IP. We won't even allow you to start. But of course, we only fund a small part of the R&D. Our budget this year is about $1.5 billion, and UK R&D spend overall is about 30 or 32 billion. So we are small. So for any SMEs who you might be talking to or who might be on the call, you don't have to be funded by us to do innovation, but if you want your money back, you need to answer those questions.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, we'll move on to our next questioner, which is Syed Sammedat. Are you there? Looks like we may have dropped.
He's there but muted, I think.
Yeah, you may need to unmute.
Yep. So a couple of questions. One question is for Professor Karl Ryder, and it's really about the existing model. And my question was, given the impact of both COVID-19 and the and Brexit, do you feel universities are really geared up to truly support SMEs with respect to scaling up their innovation? And, the model that we've been hearing about today, it's the same model that I've, sort of experienced 25, 30 years ago at early days of the sort of the teaching company schemes. It's been superseded by the KTPs and so on in terms of that sort of partnership arrangement. Is it time to reshape and remodel that sort of activity into something that's a bit more it will give us that sort of increase in the level of participation? And very quickly then a question to Paul Mason, just very much related really, in terms of the areas of focus. The areas of focus in terms of the the industrial strategy. Paul mentioned that it's going to be refreshed. We had a chat last week with Greg Clark about is the industrial strategy still valid today? And we haven't heard anything about sort of where its direction is going to be, given the circumstances that we are in today. So, how do we generate that force multiplier in the industrial strategy to enable the GDP to grow at a much faster pace than what it is today? Given that the GDP has sort of shrunk by about 10%. So these are sort of the two fundamental questions, interrelated, obviously.
Thank you very much. Karl, do you want to go first?
Yeah, that's right. I feel like now one of the politicians in these daily briefings, because you have to remember all these questions, which I'm very impressed that they managed to do. Anyway, so I'll try. I'll try to address my bit of that. Anyway, are universities geared up to help SMEs? I mean, one could speak for a long time about this. So in a sense, you have to remember, and we within the university sector, we used to think, well, actually, we're geared up to educate students and to do fundamental research where we can. But the university sector is publicly funded, and so much of our equipment comes from public funds. Much of the things that we like to access and use are public funded. So there is there's an obligation and a genuine feeling that there's a need and a desire to engage with SMEs. So yes, I do think we're geared up. The sector has changed a lot in certainly in the time I've been here, and certainly in the last 10 years. So I think we are responding to an increasing demand, and that sometimes results in not being able to kind of do all of the things that one wants to do. And Paul made reference to the fact earlier that, you know, there are lots of good ideas and can't possibly fund them all in Innovate. I've been disappointed many times and recently. So, you know, yes, I think we're certainly responding. There's certainly a willingness within the sector. And you can see that within, you know, there are lots of innovation centres that spring up in universities that are funded by the universities and through mechanisms like ERDF and so on, that are specifically designed to kind of facilitate that process. So yes, is the short answer. The COVID question, well, you know, our Vice Chancellor, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting here, has you know, appealed to us and said, you know, this is extraordinary times. What we need now is more focus on undergraduate affairs, more focus on research funding, and you got to make sure that, you know, you do all your administrations. So more focus on everything. And of course that means that we've had to prioritize in certain areas, and certainly I've spent more time this last year doing teaching and teaching admin than I've ever done before. So I think the COVID year is not representative in any respect, but my expectation is that that will be behind us soon, I hope, and that we'll continue as a sector to support SMEs.
Thank you.
Yeah, shall I pick up the couple of points? Yeah. So first of all, so we've been doing a lot of work on strategy refresh, and hopefully we'll be publishing that, you know, at some point in the not too distant future. But one of the cornerstones of our thinking as we've done the work is to look at the trajectory of global markets and to look at the evolving offering of technology, and then to try and see where the UK has strengths, so where it can put technology strengths together with the trajectory of growing markets with companies who can benefit from that. And so I think there are some things which will carry forward from the industrial strategy, because, you know, the sort of major global mega trends, you know, they're unlikely to change. You know, I mean, they might, but it's unlikely that people will stop worrying about being ill. You know, it's unlikely that people will want to live in a world where they aren't connected. So opportunities in digital will apply, and opportunities in health will apply. And, you know, people who, you know, very sadly today don't have access to clean water will want it, and people who have poor diets will want it. And so there are opportunities for people who can make that available at scale. And I don't see any reason why the UK shouldn't be, you know, an absolutely major player in the world in those areas, including in digital entertainment things, so music or movie making. You know, London's the global capital now of the video effects industry. You know, there aren't many VX studios left in Hollywood. They've mostly come to London, including people like Sony. So, and that's because of an Innovate UK program combined with Treasury and work on tax cuts. You know, they weren't here. We ran a program, now they are. So we can do it when we get our act together. So I think, you know, there are great opportunities, and as I say, some of those sectors I think are where they are. You know, construction, travel, health, food, medicines, healthcare, those sorts of things. To your other comment in the chat about responsible innovation, I just want to flag something to people who they may or may not be aware of it, because we've done quite a lot of work on responsible innovation over a decade, which culminated last year in the publication of a British standard, BSI, for responsible innovation, to give companies a framework for how to approach the issue of innovating responsibly. If you're an academic, you don't have the problem because you go to your ethics committee. But if you're one of the 1.28 million businesses in the UK that have employees, or 6 million that are listed, where do you go to approach that? And this standard, which is called PAS, PAS 440, gives a framework for companies to work on that. And to Saad's kind of question, it does draw on the Sustainable Development Goals, because they're a good framework for what constitutes human harm or human benefit. But I think there are things that we've captured in there that aren't really in the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, addictive behaviors like, oh, I don't know, you know, using AI to target advertising for whiskey sales to recovering alcoholics or something. You know, you won't find that, I don't think, in the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's one of the things that we've tried to bring in to PAS 440 above and beyond the SDGs. Although the SDGs are a fantastic framework, and people should start by thinking about them, but then think more broadly. Yeah, because there are some things that they don't cover.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Right, our next questioner is Martin Barstow. Martin.
Hi, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
You can, thank you.
So I'm afraid I happen to be a colleague of Karl Ryder's. I'm from the University of Leicester, but a different department. I'm in physics and astronomy. And I do run an SME support program called Sprint, which is funded by Research England. And I think one of the challenges I've had over many years is actually finding enough support for the wide range of SMEs that need it. So the question I wanted to really throw at the panel was, how do you think we get more support into the system to address the massive oversubscription factors for people applying for funds? I think we need to be funding more activity than we are doing.
Thank you, Martin. Karl, do you want to comment first? And then I don't know if Brian or...
Hi, Martin. Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the problems, and that's one of the things I flagged up at the end of my presentation is resource. And I'm sure Paul can tell us, but I had two entries into the last competition, the one that was in November, and both scored really highly and weren't funded. So and this is, I know this is going to come out later. It is down to resource, and I'm not sure I have sight of the mechanisms that will make that any better in the short term, because of everything else that the economy is facing. So I agree with what you're saying, Martin, and I see it myself, but I don't know what the way forward is, I have to say. Maybe
if I just comment as an SME, we have been successful in the past R&D funding, starting in with the SMART grant in 1995. But most of our more recent ones have been because we've been tacked onto majors, Rolls-Royce or various people like that, because we tried writing our own and we got high marks and didn't get it. And there's only so much time you can spend trying to do funding bids. And that's part of the problem. So at the moment, I mean, the antiviral thing was one recently where I know you had 900 applications, and I think it was massively oversubscribed, which I completely understand. That was last year about May time, but it was, you write, consider writing something, and then you think, no, well, I don't think you're going to stand much chance. At the end of the day, we have to pay ourselves. That's an SME's problem. They're not being paid for it. Although there are people who will write bids for you, but that will cost you money. And I don't think the KTNs actually particularly like bid writers, although they've got a better skill than I have, because that's not my job.
Yeah. Thank you. Paul, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth me saying a couple of things, because, I mean, so the government has obviously, there's a lot of pulls on the public purse, and, they have to make decisions between, I don't know, making a cancer drug available or giving money to Innovate UK to support companies' innovation. And I mean, I think those are very difficult decisions, and there isn't really a right answer. There's just an answer that, feels instinctively right to government, advised by civil service, supported hopefully by Parliament. So those are very difficult decisions that they have to make. What is very encouraging is that the government's committed to 2.4% of GDP. I mean, we do spend less than any other nation in the G8 on our own futures. And the Industrial Revolution was powered by investment that created the railways and the steamships and all those kind of great things that for which we benefited for decades. So I think it's good news that the government wants to do that. The economic knock of COVID is going to make that a harder call, and you know, we will, I mean, we constantly make the case. We don't want to be a pain in the neck to government, but we do try and make a strong case for the kind of investment that we can offer. What I would suggest is that if there is a thematic competition, then your odds are slightly better if you're a company in that right industry, because, you know, instead of competing potentially with many hundreds of bidders, if you're a specialist quantum technologies company and there's a quantum technologies call, you might only have 50 competitors rather than 700 or something. So if you can find a thematic call for which you have the relevant expertise and which is doing the thing that you need to do for your business to grow, I mean, I definitely wouldn't do the wrong thing just because we'll pay half. You know, that would be insanity. But if you can find the right targeted call, I would go there first rather than the responsive mode programs, which, you know, can be, you know, heavily subscribed. And yeah, and then you just have to write the best bid you can. But the other thing I would say is that we put a lot of effort into giving people feedback on their bids, and the feedback that we give you can be useful to tighten up your argument. And that can be really valuable when you're trying to persuade customers to engage with you or trial your product out, or suppliers to give you free samples so you can do a bit of development for nothing, or you know, the venture community, for example, to back you, or even your own board to let you spend the R&D budget. So I hope that applying and failing is not a complete waste of time if you can take the feedback and enhance your argument to other people with pockets. And as I said, we're a small percentage of total UK R&D spend, so there are other people to engage with.
Thank you. As ever, time is escaping from us, despite extending it till 7. So I just want to move Trevor Crichton up the list, if I may, because Trevor was instrumental in pulling this meeting together tonight. So Trevor, thank you for that. But I believe you have a question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. Okay. I'd like to ask Brian, what are the major challenges faced by SMEs in developing a global market?
The first problem is having a good product. Basically, if I go back to our experience of the Ipcote range, which is now 27 years old, it took us 10 years to get it into the market or more. So Pratt & Whitney approved it 7 years later. Our approval by GE was only about 2007-8. So we were still getting them, but now the environment has changed, and so they're looking for chrome-free. Having got to that stage of being a trusted supplier, in fact, I can mop up another question, and that is that how do large companies cope with SMEs? Actually, many of them, certainly like us, I'm glad to say, so we're continuously getting a stream of inquiries from America, Europe, China for products and product development, but many of them are variants of the product that we already make, and we troll them forward into the market. I'll give you a quick example. Honeywell in the States last 6 months were being again a competitive product, but the company would not sell them the product. They had to have an applicator involved, and they asked us to put an alternative up, and that's gone in, was at an applicator in Connecticut. But that's the sort of thing that we get involved with, I'm glad to say. So I would argue that one of the benefits we have is, as an SME, we've been going for 30 plus years as a known qualified supplier. And I'll give you an example of Eurocopter in France, who had a multinational supplying them. They bought and changed the code. Sounds minuscule, but to change a drawing on an aircraft code cost them £1,500 a part. So if you keep changing a product code, then it does. So we've been making that now. That was 2000 we started getting in there, and they keep coming back to us for more. So, and we keep developing new products, but funded by ourselves. But some of the bedrock, the Ipcote thing, that is a starter for 10. So from our point of view, we've got a part of the biggest benefit we have is we're a known and trusted supplier with a good quality record.
Excellent, thank you. Right, and we've got literally only 2 minutes left, so I'm going to take one final very, very quick question, I hope, from David Slater, and some very quick answers, and then I'll wrap things up if that's okay.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks to the 3 speakers for their interesting presentations. My question's about funding for marketing, intellectual property protection and development of innovative projects that are novel applications of established technology. SMEs and startups are particularly adept at doing this sort of work, especially when a rapid response is required. Banks are generally not interested until there's an order book, which requires the marketing has to be done. And universities and catapults are also not interested because no fundamental research is involved. Is there a source of funding for such projects?
Who would like to comment on that? Just one, I think. Sorry, was someone stick a hand up then? Yes, Karl, please.
Thanks, Stephen. Just very quickly, I don't think it's true that universities are generally not interested because it's not fundamental research. I certainly can say that from a personal point of view. I've done several development projects where the technology has been, well known, but we've just moved it forward for a particular application. So that's kind of my comment there. I can't speak so much about funding that's available for marketing and IP.
Catapults would be interesting too, but of course marketing is a different question. That is clear commercial activities, and you know that really has to be funded by businesses. We wouldn't fund marketing activity, but there is an allowance within an Innovate UK grant to do initial filing of patents, and so so long as you've got freedom, so long as you can make a new claim that doesn't exist in somebody else's claim in terms of the application area or the any other aspect of the IP, then patenting should be possible, and we will pay a percentage of the cost, but obviously only a percentage, because it starts to get progressively more and more expensive as one rolls it out and as the technology, as the patent gets older, and we want to help people develop things. And patenting is a commercial activity, really. It's not really an innovation activity. It's a commercial activity in support of an innovation activity.
Thanks very much.
Excellent.
Just for a comment, we tend to do patents because it's too costly and expensive, especially when you try to enforce it throughout the world. So it's just too much for an SME.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, as ever, time is our enemy, and I'm going to have to draw things to a close. But I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I apologise to those who wanted to ask questions who didn't have the opportunity to do so. It's often the way. You have to get in early and get your question in next time, nice and early. Can I thank our 3 speakers, to Karl, to Paul and to Brian for their contributions and making the points they have and for answering our questions so fully, much appreciated. Can I also thank the team at the PNSC, which is Lee Jeffs, John Slater, Karen Smith and Ben Allen. And I think we're joined for the first time tonight by Alfie Hoare, who is going to be writing up the notes or account of this meeting, which will then be published in our magazine Science in Parliament, which goes to all members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So it's a good record of what's been discussed. Our next Zoom discussion is in partnership with the Royal Society and will take place on Monday the 15th of March at 5:30. It will be a COVID-related theme, but we don't quite know what yet, I think it's fair to say. But with things moving as rapidly as they are, then it allows us to keep things fairly fluid. Prior to that, though, I do hope that we might see some of you on, or all of you, on the morning of Monday, the 8th of March at 11 AM, when we will be announcing the winners of 2020 STEM for Britain competition. It's around this time. Last year, it was one of the last events that actually took place in Parliament in person. We've obviously, like everyone else, had to go virtual this year, but I'm sure there'll be some very interesting posters to examine and see who has been selected by the expert panel of judges as the winners. And Karen will be sending the invitations out shortly. I think that covers everything that I need to say, other than say a final thank you to all of you for attending and for your contributions this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you at the next PNSC seminar. Good night.